I found out I wasn't good enough for my fiancé's family the night I heard them say I'd never be worth marrying. And the worst part is she was sitting right there nodding along. 4 years together, a ring on her finger, and apparently none of it mattered because my startup didn't have the right investors or the fancy office space. I'm Evan, 29, and back then I was building AI-powered automation tools in a cramped apartment, working 16-hour days on software that could streamline workflow processes for small businesses. Bianca was 26 when we met, working in marketing, and she'd always said she loved how passionate I was about my work, how I could explain complex algorithms in ways that made sense. Her parents, though, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, they were a different story from day one. Old money, the kind of family where your last name opens doors and your reputation matters more than your ideas. They never said I was trash to my face. They were too classy for that. But every interaction felt like a test I was already failing. The first time I met them, her dad asked what I did, and when I said AI automation development, he smiled this tight smile and asked if I meant like chatbots, like it was some trivial side project instead of a real business. Her mom was worse in her own way, always talking about stability and planning for the future, asking Bianca if she'd thought about where we'd live, how we'd afford children, what kind of schools we'd want. Every question had this underlying message, this quiet drumbeat of he can't provide, and it made my teeth hurt. Bianca would always defend me afterwards, tell me her parents were just old-fashioned, that they'd come around once I got funding, that love was what mattered. I proposed after 3 years because I was stupid enough to believe her, saved up for 6 months to buy a ring that wasn't huge, but wasn't cheap either, and she said yes, crying happy tears in the same apartment where I coded until 3 in the morning. For a while, everything seemed fine. We were planning a small wedding, talking about getting a place together, normal couple stuff. But her parents' comments got more frequent, more pointed, and when Bianca said we were waiting until my software launched, her mom would go quiet in this loaded way that said everything. Her dad started bringing up guys from their social circle, successful guys with corporate titles, and he'd mention them casually, talking about their partnerships at law firms or positions at investment banks, and Bianca would nod politely while I sat there feeling like a prop. The breaking point came 6 months after the engagement, and it wasn't some dramatic blowout. It was me being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Bianca had invited me to her parents' house for dinner, nothing unusual, but I got there early and let myself in through the side door like I'd done 100 times before. I could hear voices in the study, her parents and Bianca, and I was about to announce myself when I heard my name. Her dad was talking, his voice calm and measured like he was discussing a business deal, telling Bianca that I was nice and probably talented, but potential doesn't pay mortgages. I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob, listening as her mom said they didn't raise her to struggle, that she deserved someone established, someone who could give her the life she was used to. I waited, my heart pounding, for Bianca to defend me, to tell them they were being unfair. Instead, she said quietly, "I know, Mom, I know. I just thought he'd have real traction by now." And something in my chest just cracked. Her dad continued, talking about how love doesn't pay for weddings or houses or private schools, how she shouldn't settle when there were men out there who could give her everything. Her mom brought up Adrian Henderson specifically, mentioned how Bianca and him always got along, how he'd made junior partner at a major corporate law firm at only 30, and that name stuck in my head like a splinter. I backed out quietly, texted Bianca that something came up with the code, and drove home in complete silence. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't say anything. I just sat at my desk staring at lines of code and realized I'd been auditioning for a role I was never going to get. 2 weeks later, Bianca's mom called and invited us both to a small family dinner, her voice sugary in a way that made my skin crawl. I almost said no, but Bianca looked so hopeful, like maybe this was them finally accepting us, so I put on a button-down shirt and showed up. Adrian was there, sitting in the living room like he belonged there, perfectly styled hair and a watch that probably cost more than my entire setup. Bianca's mom introduced him as an old family friend, said they practically grew up together, and he shook my hand with this firm grip that lasted just a second too long. Dinner was excruciating. Her dad asked Adrian about his cases, his clients, his firm's latest merger, and Adrian answered with this easy confidence that made me feel like a kid at the adults' table. Every time I tried to contribute to the conversation, the topic would shift, and Bianca just sat there smiling politely, not noticing or not caring that her parents were basically conducting a live comparison. At one point, her dad turned to me and asked about my launch timeline, and before I could answer, Her mom cut in talking about how Adrian just closed a deal worth 6 figures. Adrian had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, but not enough to actually deflect. I excused myself early, said I had debugging to finish, and Bianca walked me to the door. I asked her point blank if she knew Adrian would be here, and she hesitated just long enough for me to know the answer was yes. She touched my arm and told me it was just dinner, not to read into it. But I was already reading into it. I was reading the whole damn book. The breakup happened 3 days later in her apartment, late at night after I'd spent 72 hours barely sleeping. She started by saying we needed to talk, and I knew. I already knew, but I let her say it anyway. I love you, Evan. I really do, but I need stability. I need to know we're going to be okay, and I can't keep waiting for someday. And her voice cracked on that last word like she was the one being hurt. I asked if this was about Adrian, and she looked away, which was answer enough. She started to say something about what her parents thought, and I cut her off, asked if it was her parents thinking or her thinking, and she went quiet. Then she slid the ring off her finger, that ring I'd worked overtime for, and placed it on the coffee table between us like it was evidence in a trial. She told me she needed more than dreams, needed someone who was already there, and I stood up because I couldn't sit there anymore. You didn't choose a better man, Bianca. You chose safety, I said, not yelling, just stating a fact, and I walked out. 2 days later, my buddy Lucas sent me a screenshot, Bianca and Adrian on Instagram, his arm around her shoulders, caption reading about finding her forever with a heart emoji, and I stared at that photo for a long time before I deleted all my social media. The universe has a sick sense of humor, and I learned that the hard way when my startup crashed 3 months after Bianca left, and I ended up delivering food to her and her perfect new boyfriend. People talk about rock bottom like it's one moment, one bad day, but it's not. It's a slow slide where every week something else breaks, and you just keep falling. After the breakup, I threw myself into work, spent 18-hour days coding and pitching and telling myself I'd show them all. I'd build something so successful they'd choke on their judgments. I got close too, had 2 potential investors interested, meetings scheduled, term sheets being drafted. Then the first investor backed out at the last minute, said the market was too crowded and my differentiation wasn't clear enough. The second investor ghosted me completely after 3 months of stringing me along, and by the time I realized what was happening, I'd burned through my savings keeping the servers running and paying for tools I couldn't afford. The landlord wanted rent I didn't have, my credit cards were maxed, and I had to shut everything down. I tried to pivot, tried to salvage some of the code, but without funding there was no path forward. Lucas told me I could crash at his place until I figured things out, and I moved in with 2 duffel bags and a laptop, everything I owned fitting in the bed of my truck. I needed money fast, any money, so I signed up for food delivery apps, the kind where you drive around for 12 hours and make maybe $100 if you're lucky. It was humiliating in ways I can't fully describe, going from building AI systems to hauling burgers and Chinese takeout, but pride doesn't pay bills, and I was drowning. I worked nights mostly, drove through the same neighborhoods where Bianca and I used to go on dates, and every street corner felt like a ghost. Lucas never made me feel bad about it, never asked when I'd get back on my feet, just split his groceries with me and pretended not to notice when I couldn't chip in for rent. 3 months into this new life, I was numb, running on autopilot, accepting orders and dropping them off without really seeing anything. Then one night I got a ping for an upscale Italian place downtown, the kind of restaurant Bianca always wanted to go to but I could never afford, and I should have known right then that the universe was setting me up. I picked up the order, 2 entrees and a bottle of wine, drove to this fancy apartment building with a doorman and everything, and took the elevator up to the 8th floor. I knocked on the door of apartment 814, and Adrian opened it.